Hello, and welcome to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're going to be sharing tips for your 1L summer job hunt. Your Law School Toolbox hosts are Allison Monahan and Lee Burgess. That's me. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, the Catapult Conference, and the Trebuchet Legal Careers site. Allison also runs the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review on iTunes. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we'd love to hear from you. So with that, let's get started.
So as Lee mentioned, today we're going to be talking about the basics of the 1L job search. If you don't have a summer job yet, stay tuned. So let's start with a background question. Does it really matter what you do after your first year of law school, and what kind of jobs can people realistically expect to get anyway?
Well, I think in true lawyer form, it depends. It can depend on your school. I think, different institutions really have different organizations or law firms who might be willing to take on 1Ls. But I think that it can also just really depend on the person. Just doing something legal over the summer, whether it be public interest work or working at a government agency or working for another kind of nonprofit or working in a law firm, all of that's going to look great on your resume and going to give you valuable legal experience because at this point, you probably don't have any.
Yeah, most people do not go to law school with a lot of experience, if any. Some people have been paralegals or something like that. But, the average law student has probably never actually really set foot into a legal work environment before.
No. Which is probably why you're not going to get paid. But,
Yeah. And it totally depends on the school, too. And it depends on the economy as well. Mm-hmm. When I was a 1L, we had firms in New York City coming on campus to interview 1Ls to basically, treat you like a summer associate. I'm not sure that happens so much anymore, but I think it does, it still does happen at certain schools. Mm-hmm. But, that's only going to be like the very upper echelon, let's face it.
Yeah.
Where someone's going to pay you $3,000 a week, which they did for me. It was pretty fun.
That helps those credit card bills that pile up over the semesters.
Yeah, no, it's being a summer associate, if you can get that position, it's a great thing to do your first summer. In fairness, I actually think for experience-wise, there are probably other jobs that are actually more compelling. Mm-hmm. But, it's hard to turn down $3,000 a week if somebody's going to pay you that to, do, who knows what? You don't know anything really at that point. So
Exactly. If you know, though, what you're going to do after graduation, I don't think there's anything wrong with starting to lay the groundwork of experience, right now when you're thinking about your first year summer. For instance, if you want to be a public interest lawyer and work in environmental law, you should really try and do something in either a nonprofit around environmental legal advocacy or some other sort of public interest work.
Yeah, I think for public interest people, it's absolutely critical. If it's at all possible, you definitely want to start making those connections. You want to start showing that you're serious about this. Even more, if you think you're going to work in a firm, it doesn't really matter, frankly, what you do your first summer.
That's true.
But, if you're very serious about doing public interest work of a certain type, you need to start doing that. So just because you need to be able to do the work, but also because that's how you're going to get that permanent job.
Exactly. And just remember, this is probably going to be a tough job hunt for the summer because every law student is out there pounding the pavement trying to get work. So, keep your options open and really explore a wide variety of opportunities. Because like we said, you don't really know anything. So you're going to learn something from just about any job that you get.
Yeah, and I think your point about just try, if at all possible, to do something legal is absolutely critical because you need something on your resume that you can talk about as you get more deeply into your real job hunt. And it doesn't look great if you don't do anything your first summer.
Exactly. So what are some typical options that people do during the summers? We just talked about public interest organizations, and there's such a wide variety of those. many more than I even thought there were when I started looking at public interest jobs my 1L summer.
Yeah.
Did you even look at public interest jobs, or were you just focused on the summer associate stuff?
Oh, no, I didn't even want to be a summer associate. I actually wanted a public interest job, and I went and talked to the public interest office at Columbia, and they were horrible and made me cry. And literally, I never went back. I still harbor anger about that. I've talked to them about it after graduating, about how they would not be getting any money. And no, they were horrible. They were absolutely horrible. They basically told me, like, I should just get a firm job and donate money to the church if I wanted to do that. Oh, my God. And I left in tears. And that was pretty much the end of my public interest job hunt.
Wow. It's pretty intense.
Yeah. So, I mean, in retrospect, maybe I should have persevered. But, I mean, at some point, it's like the treadmill of you just get on it at some of these schools and suddenly you're on it. Suddenly I was like, well, they were really mean to me and I don't want to go cry again. So, look, somebody's, I sent out a bunch of resumes we'll talk about in a few minutes. There's a deadline, like December 1st is when you can send applications to NALP employers. So my roommate and I, like, dutifully, so it's back before we were going to email our resumes, we dutifully sat in the living room, on the day before December 1st, like stamping envelopes and putting our resume in the mail to 100 different, basically random law firms that said they might hire 1Ls all over the country. I think I got one interview from that in San Francisco. But after that, people came on campus and you could just sign up and they were like, hey, great, we want to hire you. And I'm like, awesome, sounds good.
Yeah. I mean, we had a public interest fair. That's where I kind of learned about the public interest opportunities. And you could do resume drops at the fair and you could meet people at the fair. And then I followed up with organizations after that I was interested in and got some interviews that way. So really participating in all of the opportunities on campus to meet as many organizations as you can is another way to just reach out and try and kind of pound the pavement.
Yeah, in a lot of cities, I know New York, for example, they have like a big public interest fair in the spring for all the law schools. Like one of my roommates went to that. Ironically, she ended up getting a firm job at Cravath, but which actually proves the point that at some schools it is harder to get a public interest job than it is to get a different type of job that pays a lot more money.
Yeah.
But again, like, she didn't actually really want that job.
Yeah.
She wanted to do public interest work and she was having a hard time finding a job. And then that kind of fell into her lap. And she's like, well, okay, if like one of the best law firms in the world wants to pay me $3,000 a week to go, I think she even got to live in London like half the summer.
Oh my gosh, doesn't sound so bad.
But she hated it, so I don't know. Point being, be careful what you sign up for. But yeah, so I think public interest is a big one, but just because there's so many options and there's so many jobs. And if you're going to be working for free, which a lot of times you're going to have to, somehow that seems nicer if you're doing it for a public interest organization than some, small firm that just decides not to pay you sort of quasi illegally.
Yes.
Another big one is judicial externships. So working for a judge can be a really fantastic way to spend your summer. Sometimes people wonder like what impact this will have if they think that they want to do a clerkship. And the answer is it depends. Certain judges have a policy of never hiring their own externs. So like the judge that I worked for, he was like, well, why would I hire you as a clerk? Like, you've already had the opportunity to like see what this is like if you work for me for the summer. And he made that very clear. I mean, he was perfectly happy to recommend a clerk that he liked to a different judge, but he was like, I'm not going to hire you. Whereas I have other friends who worked for the summer, the judge liked them, and then they basically were like first in line for a clerkship.
Yeah, that's interesting that I actually didn't know that different judges had different policies on that.
Yeah, they're very individual. So, if that's something you're thinking about, if you really know that you want to clerk like on the same, say you're trying to get an externship in the Southern District of New York and you really want to clerk in the Southern District of New York, it's a fair interview question. Like, what is your policy on hiring externs as clerks? Is this something you would consider or not?
Yeah, that is interesting. I also think with the firm jobs, I know we're talking about the big law jobs, but I think there can be interesting opportunities at small local firms or even solo practice firms.
Oh, definitely. And those are much more realistic. I mean, let's face it, like getting a 1L big law job, it's possible in theory, particularly at certain schools, but it's always been very rare.
Yeah. I think especially if you are having any interest of going back to, say, your hometown. So I'm from the Central Valley of California, and sometimes those of us from the Valley would go away to law school, but people either wanted to come back to practice or they were willing to come back to practice. And there are no large law schools in the Central Valley. And so all the firms there are kind of interested in law students from outside of the Valley who are willing to come back. And the competition is much different there because, one, not a lot of people want to come back to the Central Valley sometimes, I have to be honest. But they would like people to come back because it broadens their base of people they can hire. So it may be that you can go outside of, wherever you're going to law school and find some opportunities that wouldn't be available to you near where you're going to school.
Yeah, and I think definitely, in a situation like that, like a lot of these firms might expect that, oh, well, you're in your 2L summer, you're going to work in the big city. If you're in San Francisco, you're probably going to try to get a job in San Francisco. But for your 1L summer, you might be willing to spend it somewhere else. And so I think they can take advantage of that. And, frankly, the firm that I worked for in New York after my first year, I liked better than the firm I worked after my second year. So, if I had stayed in New York, I actually would have given serious thought to working there. So it would have worked out really well for them because that's exactly what they want to have happen.
And there are even some other opportunities if you're willing to relocate. I know that at my school, one of the professors was a death penalty defense advocate, and he actually ran a program where they would place students from my school in death penalty defense organizations in the South for the summers. And that was what some people who were interested in criminal law would do after their 1L summer. You have to be willing to relocate, but if you're willing to relocate for the summer, you can, possibly get opportunities that wouldn't have been available to you if you just want to hunker down and stay in your same apartment.
Right. And the reality is, it's probably a lot cheaper to live in the summer wherever you're doing death penalty defense work in the South than to live in a city like San Francisco or New York, which if you're not getting paid is a serious consideration.
Yeah, it's true. So again, expanding your mind to all of these opportunities and realizing that whatever you do, it's still going to likely make you a better lawyer.
Yeah. And sometimes it's almost like you may as well just throw out some crazy ideas. Like I had a friend in law school who'd, for whatever reason, decided she wanted to live in the Bay Area, but she'd never lived there. She had no connection. She was going to school in New York. And so she just started emailing like random small firms in the Bay Area. And it's basically like, I'm a 1L at Columbia. I'm willing to work for free for the summer. Like, will you hire me? And shockingly enough, someone was like, yeah, actually, that sounds like a pretty good idea. Maybe we'll pay you minimum wage,
No, totally.
And it actually enabled her then to have those connections for the second year interviews when she could say, oh, I'm really serious about being in this location. I basically am working here more or less for free my first summer because that's how serious I am. And, in a competitive city, that's enough to give you an edge.
For sure. Because I do think people worry about investing in folks that aren't going to want to live there. And, because it does, if a firm hires you, they are investing money in you. You are not making money for them, even if you are quote unquote working.
Particularly now as a first year when people won't even pay for you. So, it's like anything you can do for, the place that you think you ultimately want to end up, even if it's taking a job that's not necessarily related to the area of law that you want to practice. But, maybe you say you want to end up in, located in Chicago or whatever. Get a public interest job in Chicago. At least then you can go to summer events at the Bar Association. You can meet people. It gives you that base of, I'm serious about doing this.
For sure. What about if somebody wants to eventually work in-house? I hear this a lot from students in the Bay Area who are interested in entering in-house jobs in the tech market, so down in Silicon Valley, and they're not sure if they can get summer jobs at those companies.
Yeah, I think it's pretty rare, but that's not to say it doesn't happen. I think some of them have fellowships, especially for diverse candidates. So it's definitely something, this is something if you're interested in, it's, you should go and talk to your career services office. You should do your research. Certainly I wouldn't say like being, like intern in-house counsel is that common over their first summer, but it's not impossible. Nothing is impossible. Do you know people who happen to be general counsel at a particular place that you'd like to work? I have friends who are working as attorneys in startups, and if someone called them that they knew or that someone they knew and was like, hey, I'm really interested in this area, I'd like to work for you for the summer, would they necessarily hire you? Right. I don't know, but they would think about it.
Yeah. I think that's another thing that we should probably mention is you should not at all feel bad about asking your network to help you to do this
No,
search. You
definitely
should
not.
call in favors and ask people, does anyone know anyone who works at Facebook? Does anyone know anyone? Because that is really the way, oftentimes, how you differentiate yourself. There are so many highly qualified people that will apply for some of these jobs that sometimes finding someone to just pull your resume out of the pile is what you need to just even get that interview. Because
or it might not even be a job per se that exists. You know, it's not like a job that they're advertising on like monster.com or whatever necessarily. It's like, you know, if there's like a small tech startup, like they might be willing to bring somebody on board to help them do some legal stuff over the summer.
Yeah.
Maybe, who knows? But, you know, they might actually create that position for you.
Yeah. I think kind of calling in those favors or really using your network that you've built over the years or your family's network, if you have family members who might possibly have connections or friends who work in different industries, it's time to make those phone calls. Or send those
and your
emails.
professors, you know, you mentioned your professor who has like his consistently hires people. Like ask your professors, like, do you know anyone like this? I mean, you can't just, again, like as with anything, I don't think just showing up unannounced at office hours and saying, I need a job for the summer, help me.
Right.
Is going to really get you that far.
No.
But, you know, if it's something that's like, hey, I'm really interested in either like this company or this area or whatever, you know, I've done my research. Here's where I've hit a wall. Do you know anyone who might be willing to talk to me?
Right.
And, you know, this again, it's the art of the informational interview. I can link to a full series from the Girls Guide on doing an informational interview. But, you know, you may have to go out and do some informational interviews with people who may have links to someone who might hire you. Because this is how you get summer jobs.
Yeah, it's really how you just create a network so you can get any job too, not just summer jobs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you're laying the groundwork for your legal network of folks that you can call on. And this idea of informational interviewing or investing time in, you know, presenting yourself to folks who are practicing law in areas that interest you is totally worth your time. And you might be rolling your eyes and saying, seriously, guys, we have no free time. How am I possibly ever going to do this? And you need to make time to do it because it is just part of the things that you need to do to become part of this legal community that you are in school to join.
Well, also, you have winter break.
Yeah, winter break.
You know, particularly like if you're going back to your hometown over winter break and you're thinking maybe you wouldn't mind working there. Wow, what an amazing opportunity to set up some informational interviews.
Exactly.
So let's talk about some government stuff because that's another common one. And I think that's actually what you did your first summer, right?
I did. I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office out in Oakland, and it was a really great experience. I would highly recommend in looking into U.S. attorneys' offices, especially if you think you might want to do litigation, because at least at that time they would get you qualified so you could appear in court on misdemeanor matters. And that was a very humbling but kind of awesome experience to get to stand up in court and say you were representing, you know, the people of the United States. So I learned a lot, I think, getting to hang out with smart litigators. Even if they are litigating, you know, criminal cases where maybe that isn't your passion, you still learn a lot by getting to watch them and see how they work. So I think it was a great experience.
Yeah, I think just anytime you have a chance to be in court, you know, as a law student, even if you're not the one standing up and saying, you know, you're representing the U.S., but you learn so much just about everything just by being there.
When I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office, there was a large patent case going on in one of the courtrooms, and they were actually fighting over the screen on a dialysis machine. I mean, it was like one of these things where it was not sexy. It was like they were literally fighting about dialysis machines, but they had flown in all of these high-paid litigators from around the country because there apparently aren't that many people who can argue about dialysis machines. And so it was really sweet. The attorneys at the U.S. Attorney's Office, they told us about this case, and they're like, you should just go and watch some of these lawyers.
Yeah.
Because the lawyers that they fly in to do these arguments are worth watching. And I remember they had one litigator that was from Texas, and so he had kind of this like Southern drawl going, and I watched his closing argument. And again, dialysis machines. I mean, we're not talking about something that's very riveting. And one of my friends who was also doing this clerkship over the summer, we almost clapped at the end of his closing. I don't even remember what he said, but it was just so good. It was one of those where you're like nodding, and he had everyone in the room was with him. He clearly had the jury. They did end up winning. So maybe it was partly due to that. But I learned so much by just watching this guy present this case. And, that's so valuable. Just hanging out at a courthouse can give you such incredible insight into the legal marketplace. Of course, the government attorneys also told us to go in and try and calculate how many billable hours were happening every hour. And there between like the litigation teams and all the associates and paralegals that were sitting in the audience.
I did patent trials, and each side was, I think, burning at least $1 million a month in legal fees.
Yeah, it was just unreal. But great experiences. So just being in a courthouse and watching other litigators can be a great learning experience. But I had a lot of friends who worked for DA's offices or public defenders. I think it depends on the county about whether or not they take summer help.
In New York, you have the Bronx defenders, which a lot of people work for. It's like if you're interested in this area, they're probably anyone who does this sort of work could be like, oh yeah, these are the people who might hire you.
Yeah, exactly. Usually schools have good ties with these offices. So talking to your career services office is a really great place to start because they might have some insight on, working for them for the summer. Or if you can't get a summer opportunity with one of these offices, but you're really interested, they oftentimes will hire people during the school year.
Yeah.
So, still kind of trying to meet people and get in the door. I know that in some metropolitan areas like San Francisco, these jobs were harder to get during the summer because a bunch of people from all over the country wanted to come to San Francisco for the summer. But during the school year, they would hire local San Francisco law students. And so it was almost a bit easier to get those jobs during the school year.
Yeah, and you can usually get academic credit too. So it alleviates some issues about not getting paid. Another thing people sometimes do, which if you're interested can be good, is being a research assistant to a professor. So in that case, you're making a connection if you want to have a clerkship or something. And it's typically pretty flexible work. It's typically pretty interesting. So if you're not feeling like you want to do, a super hardcore internship, being a research assistant is something to put on the resume and is something to build a relationship with.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Especially part-time. That can be something that you can pick up part-time and then balance it with some other part-time volunteer work.
Yeah, or even part-time paid work.
Yeah.
If you're like, I can't live on, the $12 an hour they're going to pay me as a research assistant, but, I'm willing to work as a waitress or drive for Uber or do whatever.
Yeah. Drive for Uber. That's an interesting one. I hadn't thought about that one.
Yeah, no, TaskRabbit, Uber, like all these things.
Yeah.
There are ways you can kind of make it work, even if you're, as we'll talk about in a second, not necessarily getting paid.
Yeah.
And then one other idea that is often really great for your first summer is to do something international, whether it's international public interest work. I mean, there are courts all over the world, everything from like courts of human rights to like different country courts. If you kind of get creative about it, it's possible that you could have, an amazing travel summer and also do something legal and have something interesting to talk about.
Yeah, and sometimes your school may even have programs. My school had a program in Cambodia that a lot of my friends went to. And then after working in Cambodia, they would travel around Asia for a while, which was pretty cool. And I had friends who really wanted to do international work after graduation, and they kind of used programs like that to lay the foundation. One of my friends who, from law school, who works in The Hague, that was kind of what she did. She took all the opportunities she could during the summers to get some international exposure.
Yeah, and I think that's what you should be thinking about all along. It's like, hopefully you have some clue what you want to do when you graduate and think about tailoring these summer jobs to get you closer to that goal, whether it's geographically or, the area of the law that you're doing, whatever it is. I mean, if you have to do something totally random, fine, better than doing nothing.
Right.
But ideally, it's something that's at least loosely related to what you think you might want to do.
Yeah, exactly. So, we talked about the fact that you may not get paid, or you may just get paid a pittance for this first 1L summer. But sometimes there are funding opportunities at the schools, especially for public interest works. They usually call these like public interest fellowships. Is that what they called them at your school?
Yeah, I don't, now a lot of the top schools, these are guaranteed. You just have to ask for it. When I was there, you actually had to apply for it, and it was highly competitive, of course, because everything was. But now, I mean, I think a lot of the top schools are like, oh, do you want to do public interest work? Here's $4,000 or whatever to survive on for the next 3 months.
Yeah, exactly. And that can just help, lighten the load a little bit, because money just starts to just run out quickly. We understand that.
Yeah. And again, I mean, I think, people often say, well, look, I can't work for free. And there, I mean, clearly that is often the case.
Right.
But I think, if you think creatively, can you get a part-time job that's a few days a week and then do something else in your spare time to make some money, whether it's tutoring for the LSAT or working at a restaurant or driving for, Uber or doing one of these like sharing economy type things that are pretty flexible. They're, depending on where you are, particularly like, or, it could even be like, can you nanny for a kid for a few days a week or babysit? There are options. And you don't have to put that on your resume. I mean, you can, but, what you typically are going to put on your resume is what you spend the rest of your time doing.
Exactly. So let's say you're in a position where you have a few different opportunities for your 1L job. What do you think, Allison, are some of the most important factors to consider when making this decision?
Well, I think there are a variety of things. I mean, I think you want to look at what type of experience are you really going to get. Maybe you're going to get a lot of great courtroom experience, or maybe you want to sort of dig into this during the interviews, like what would you actually be doing? And also I think look at whether this organization has an established program or not, because if they do, you're probably more likely to have a sort of structured experience and really get something out of it. And the problem, of course, with kind of creating your own path is like you get there and they're like, right, so what exactly are we going to have you working on? Who's going to be supervising you?
Right.
Whereas I would have to imagine, certainly the big firm experience is very structured. I'd have to imagine the U.S. Attorney's Office is also pretty structured.
Yeah, it was. And I think it's a good thing to learn more about. Are you just going to be filing paper?
Right,
or,
exactly. Making coffee, running errands.
Exactly.
Or are you going to get to do something substantive? Because another thing that can come out of your first year summer job is a writing sample. So if you are doing substantive work, that's something to keep an eye out for. Is this something I could use later when I'm applying for a clerkship or something, or applying for a job? In addition to the experience, I think definitely connections. Are these the people who can help set me up for my next job or the job after that?
Right.
It's particularly relevant in the public interest context. Are these people who know people or who are in the area that I think I want to work in?
Yeah.
And finally, if somebody's offering you a lot of money, that's kind of hard to turn down.
That's true, because money does make those, the law school debt feel a little bit less of a load. So
yeah, I mean, I think there's an argument for turning down a firm job if you can.
Yeah.
I mean, if there's something else you want to do, but let's face it, most people are not going to say no to that.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so just in summary, why don't we talk about kind of your list of our top ways of people are going to find these summer jobs?
Sure.
So what would you start with?
Well, I think one key deadline, which is probably already passed by the time you're listening to this, is that you can start applying for a lot of these jobs on December 1st. And these are NALP employers. If you go to the NALP website, we can link to the search functionality, but you can actually search by NALP employers who are accepting applications from 1Ls over the summer. And so that can give you, in a particular city or a particular area of interest, it can give you kind of a bunch of people to apply to. I mean, frankly, it's unlikely. Your odds are not great, but it's worth at least looking into.
And exploring a little bit.
Yeah, I think people are more likely to get a summer job their first year through a job fair.
Yeah, I do too. And so you should really research about your school's job fairs, your city's job fairs. Maybe your bar association even has job fairs, but spend some time maybe over your holiday break getting these on your calendar so you make sure that you are ready to attend them and your resume and everything is ready to be passed out. You have a suit to wear to these job fairs, things like that.
Yeah, I think there's some minority ones too that are worth looking into if that applies to you. I mean, your school may have it. This is definitely the time to make an appointment, stop by career services and say, look, I'm looking for a 1L job. What are my options?
Yeah, help.
Yeah, and the school might have a job board or an online forum or something or an email list. I mean, people tell me, students oh yeah, they send all these emails, but I just don't have time to read them.
Yeah, bad idea.
It's you don't have time to read the email that might just land in your lap a summer position,
Yeah.
I think I would probably take 5 minutes a day while I'm having coffee to look at that email. It's just like, come on, seriously?
Yeah, exactly. And even your school may even have a job fair or on-campus job interviews, even for nonprofit work. Make sure you know what's going on so you can, take the low-hanging fruit, do the stuff that's easy and delivered to you.
Yeah, but these are people who are looking to hire people like you. Yeah. They're taking time out of their day to come to your school and try to find someone to work for them for the summer.
Yeah.
You want to make sure that your resume is in on time, that you filled out all the paperwork. Just take the steps. This is the easiest way to get it, because this is, it's not an easy job search. So if you ignore the easy stuff, it's going to be problematic.
Exactly. And then as we talked about, work your contacts. Do you know any lawyers, or do you have any friends that are lawyers, or do you know business people, maybe somebody you've worked for in the past who might be able to connect you with?
They always hire lawyers.
They do. And ask your school, your professors, other mentors that you might have. Try and collect as many names as you can of people who will meet with you so you can start to, introduce yourself and join this legal community.
Yeah, and if you're doing pro bono work your first year, that's a great way, to get a mentor who might be willing to, basically throw you a bone. You're spending your time doing some pro bono work. Hey, I'll help this person out. They seem nice. They seem ambitious. I want to make their life a little easier. I'll call my friend who mentioned that she wouldn't mind having an intern.
Exactly.
This is how, when I was in architecture school, that's how I got my first job. Is my friend's stepmother was a well-known architect. And so, my friend talked to her mother, who wasn't hiring, but she had a friend who was.
Yep, exactly.
This is how the world works.
Yep, it is. And then what are some of these organizations looking for when they're reviewing resumes and talking to you? I mean, we have a helpful podcast on resume and cover letter basics that people should check out.
Yes, they should.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, everyone's looking for someone who's competent and can help them. I mean, that's kind of the bottom line. You're not just hiring this person for the hell of it. You want them to do something for you, and you want them not to be a problem.
Right.
A bad hire for the summer is actively a problem.
Right.
So, everybody's looking for competence. Do you have some set of skills? Can you learn things? And then these big law firms, I mean, what they're really looking for is someone who can sell people at the school on this firm. So
point.
Yeah, typically the firms that are hiring 1Ls are either less well-known, a little less prestigious, and they're trying to break in to this school market, And so they want somebody who is a cheerleader, basically. They want someone that thinks going to like them, is going to say nice stuff about them. And when they send their 2L interviewees, you're like, oh, you should totally talk to Allison. She was here last summer. Yeah, talk to her about her experience. They want somebody who's going to be like, yeah, I had a great experience. They're totally awesome. You should work there.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And if you're having trouble, if you're struggling, you're really going to have to think about whether or not you can work for free. There are more free opportunities than paid opportunities. And so just explore all your options for getting funding, working part-time other places, and see if you can, create an opportunity for yourself to work for free.
Right. I mean, you have to think about your living situation too. Are you gonna move back in, say with your parents, with a friend, with friends' parents? This is a time to call in those life favors.
True.
I have a great job opportunity offer in DC, but it's unpaid. Do you think it's possible that your mother-in-law or whoever might let me have a spare bedroom?
Yep. Exactly.
And people will do that. I have friends who've lived with their significant other's parents for the summer because that was just what worked out.
Yep. And know you're going to probably have to hustle. And that's just the reality of all job markets. It's not just your 1L. So, hustle. It's okay. That's what everybody's got to do.
Well, but I think too, people sometimes flip out if by January they don't have a job. And I think that's probably too early to be flipping out.
Yeah.
I think a lot of these job prospects don't really come into play until, say, the spring. By March, by April, if you haven't found anything, I would probably be a little more concerned.
Yep.
But a lot of the job fairs for public interest stuff aren't until in the spring anyway. So, I think it's a balance. You want to be taking steps to be putting the ball out there and moving the ball forward. But I don't think you need to totally flip out until it's spring, the end of the year, you're taking exams and you still have nothing to do for the summer. That's a more serious problem.
Yes. And I think that's when you want to start looking into other things like summer school programs or maybe other school exchange programs, going abroad, doing something so that you fill that time on your resume with something that's connected to a legal experience.
Definitely.
Even if it's summer school. So
yeah, and I mean, arguably, I don't know, do they let you borrow extra money for summer school?
You know, I never took summer school, so I don't know. But
Yeah,
you can talk to your school about that in your financial aid office.
Yeah, they might find a way for you to take that extra money, which is ironic. They'll let you take more for that, but not for your living expenses, so you can actually have a job.
Oh, financial aid, that's a whole other podcast.
Yeah, that's a whole other podcast. But,
Yes.
unfortunately, we are out of time on that note. So if you enjoyed this episode of our podcast, we'd love it if you would take a second to leave a review and rating on iTunes. We can't guarantee it'll get you a job, but it'll make us happy. And you can subscribe so you don't miss anything. And if you have any questions or comments, or, if you think we might be able to help you find a job, please don't hesitate to reach out to Lee and Allison at Lee, Lee, and Allison, Alison, at lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening. We'll talk soon, and good luck finding that first summer job.